I turned on my Twitter feed today, and I don't go to Twitter much, or call it X. And what I saw is that here in the United States of America, just about every major city is under protest. DC is protesting. Los Angeles is protesting. Chicago is protesting. All these different places are under protest, whether it's the president's new mandate to overhaul the city of Washington, D.C., whether it's pro-Palestine protests, or whether it's protests against ICE. It feels like the United States is in chaos, all because a lot of us are miseducated and, manipulated by very savvy propaganda. But I'm here to break down some of the lies today, particularly on the side of the Free Palestine movements. And it's a shame for me to say this, but unfortunately, Black people, we have consistently been on the wrong side of history when it comes to protests. Recently, I should say. Outside of the civil rights movement, we have been pulled into other people's problems and been a Trojan horse and reaped zero benefits from your efforts. But let's get into it.
We've got some difficult days ahead. I just want to do God's will. I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
That if you stand with Hashem and you stand for what's right, you will march across the finish line. You will have victory.
Somehow you must be able to say in your own lives and really believe it, I am black but beautiful. Beautiful.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to another episode of Kosher and Black. I am your host, Baruch, and I'm so glad you decided to join me right here. You could be doing anything else with your time, but you chose to hang out with your guy just for a few moments. Listen, if you haven't done so already, please share this podcast with a few people that you know. Share it on your social media, text it to a friend, get it on whether on WhatsApp or whatever you may be. Just share it to somebody that you think would enjoy this information. Also, if you're listening to this on YouTube, please share, comment, and like this so it can tell the YouTube algorithm that you like this information and that other people will like it too. Let's get right into this episode, ladies and gentlemen, and this is going to be some heavy stuff today. As you heard in the intro, we're going to be talking about why is it that what I call fake activists, but these Black folks who claim to be about freedom, equality, and love, but they're fighting on the side that's about death, hate, and segregation. I'm talking about the Black people who wave their flag, the Palestinian flags, the watermelon flags, and shout to the highest Free Palestine, the ones that get on Instagram, the ones that get on YouTube and perpetuate these false narratives of a starvation caused by Israel in Gaza. These claims are ridiculous. They're outrageous. And the fact that it's dark-skinned folks in America siding with Palestinians is shocking to me. This is what happens when you base all your values on skin color and not truth. You get trapped into narratives and you get trapped into propagandas that actually harm you and don't push any of your values forward. What are you talking about, Baruch? Well, let's get into it. I'm going to cover about 3 or 4 segments that discuss the reason why Black people should not be siding with the Palestinians, specifically those in Gaza, which is ran by a terrorist organization called Hamas. And Hamas, along with the Houthis, along with the Iranians, along with Hezbollah, all the countries, so that's Lebanon, that's Syria, that's Gaza, that is Iran, all these places want to establish Sharia law. And if you are for this, the freedom of Gaza and all these places, you are also pushing for, by default, Sharia law. And let me tell you why black liberalism or black freedom and Sharia law just do not mix. And you're fighting on the wrong side. All right, let's get into this. So the first segment I want to talk about, and as always, I'll be looking down at my notes, but as the first segment, I'll be talking about the black democratic values versus Sharia law. So as you know, 90% of black people vote Democrat. Whether they believe in the democratic values or not, I don't think most of them believe in the kind of crazy stuff that Joe Biden has instituted in this last 4 years of the democratic rule in this country. But nevertheless, overwhelmingly, black people voted for his predecessor, Kamala Harris. Overwhelmingly, state after state after state, black people vote Democrat, period. And I'm not here to discuss whether that's good or bad. People vote however they want to vote. You vote your own conscience. You do you. I'm not here for that. I'm more apolitical than anything. If I were to be voting, I'm more of a libertarian type of person anyway. Let people live the way they want to live. Leave them alone as long as what they're living isn't impacting what their neighbor is doing, right? In a positive way. But anyhow, said all to say, most black people do vote Democratic. So let's break down the difference between Sharia law and democratic law. First thing on the docket, the LGBTQ plus rights. There's been a lot of people, queers for Palestine and all the LGBTQ plus community that says free Palestine. They say from the river to the sea. But what they don't realize is that they wouldn't last 2 seconds in Gaza. If they were to go to Gaza, if they were to try to live in Iran, if they were to try to live in Syria, if they were to try to live in Lebanon, they would either, one, be imprisoned for being homosexual, for being trans. They would be sentenced to death. Or, if not a private sentence to death, they would be publicly hung in the square by building cranes or thrown off roofs. Don't believe me? Google it. You can look it up for yourselves. As a community that has fought for its place in the American story, black liberals, and don't get it twisted, if you're voting for the Democratic Party, you are voting for liberalism at this point. And if you're voting for the Republican Party, you're voting MAGA, whether you want to do that or not. Both of these parties are now extremely polarized to the far right and to the far left. Anyhow, within the Democratic Party, there's a deep belief in equality and the right of every individual to love who they love without fear. Many black Democrats, particularly younger generations, see the LGBTQ plus rights as an extension of the civil rights movement. Whether you believe that or not, the people that are running the government, these kids that are in college, the ones who are protesting, that's what they believe. It is about dignity, freedom, and the ability to live one's truth without state-sanctioned persecution. Pride is celebrated in our communities as a reflection of progress and justice. In contrast, Sharia law, in its strictest interpretations, which we see in Gaza, which we see in Iran, categorically rejects this vision. In countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Gaza, homosexuality is punishable by death. These are no isolated or outdated examples. Even in modern times, individuals are imprisoned, lashed, or executed simply for being gay. For black liberals who hold the values of justice and freedom dear, supporting or defending Sharia ideology becomes a direct contradiction of these values. One cannot champion LGBTQ plus liberation at home while ignoring or excusing the systematic oppression of queer people abroad under Islamic legal systems. Hear me. If you are marching for Pride in June, but silent about men being hanged for being gay in Tehran, your activism is selective and downright just disingenuous. Stop blaming Israel for every injustice in the world while excusing radical Islamic regimes that kill people simply for existing. Stand up for all oppressed people or admit you're not truly about justice. Fact check. Where is the biggest pride parade? What country is the most tolerant of the LGBTQ lifestyle, you don't have to look it up, I'll tell you. It's Israel. It's particularly the city of Tel Aviv, who champions the LGBTQ community. And a lot of them that would march for you and for your rights were killed, raped, and are still in the hands of Hamas when they went to the Nova Festival concert. Yet you dare to scream, "Free Palestine." You should be ashamed of yourself. But let's keep moving. Let's talk women's rights. So you can't be black and Democrat and not believe in the rights of women. That's what Kamala Harris ran on in her campaign heavily. The women's rights. That's what the left runs on. That's what the Democratic Party runs on in every state, in every county, in every election. Women's rights. Let's see what the Democratic women's rights look like in contrast to what we have in Gaza under Sharia law. Within the Black Democratic sphere, there's a long history of uplifting Black women as leaders, thinkers, and trailblazers. From Harriet Tubman, Fannie Lou Hamer, to Shirley Chisholm, who, by the way, worked with the Lubavitcher Rebbe to implement her public aid system there in New York City. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe worked side by side with Shirley Chisholm to achieve a lot of good social safety nets for people in need in New York City. Anyhow, Stacey Abrams, the empowerment of Black women is central to progressive politics. Reproductive rights, equal pay, and the dismantling of patriarchy are consistent themes. Black liberal values honor bodily autonomy, self-determination, and the right for women to participate equally in all aspects of society. But under strict Sharia law period, I should say, women face starkly different realities. And you can look it up all over the internet. There are women who have been killed, who've been beaten. Acid has been thrown on their face just for taking off a hijab. That's the wrap that goes on a woman's head. In many Muslim majority countries that implement Sharia-based legal codes, women must obtain permission from male guardians to travel. It doesn't sound like a democracy to me. To marry or even access health care. Inheritance laws give women half the share of men. Court systems often require 2 female witnesses to equal 1 male testimony. These laws are not just oppressive in theory, but play out in the daily lives of millions. For Black liberals who recognize how dangerous patriarchy is in the U.S., it is critical to acknowledge and oppose similar or worse systems abroad. So if you're talking about free Palestine back into the hands of Hamas, this is what you are freeing, quote unquote, their women into. Don't talk about smashing the patriarchy in America and then look the other way when radical Islamic law forces women into legal second-class citizenship. And don't you dare deflect by saying, but Israel. Israel is the only country in the Middle East, where women have full rights. Call out real oppression, no matter who's doing it. Here's a big one. Free speech. Black Democrats have always seen the power of free speech as a tool of liberation. From the speeches of Malcolm X to the prowls of James Baldwin to the freedom to speak truth to power has been non-negotiable. Whether it's protesting police brutality, criticizing government failures, or advocating for social change, the right to express is central to our collective political identity. In countries governed by Sharia law, criticism of religious leaders, questioning Islamic tenets, or drawing deceptions of religious figures can result in arrest. Depictions of religious figures, can result in arrest. We saw this back in 2005, 6, 7 When Israel handed over Gaza to the PLO, then the people of Gaza turned around and freely elected Hamas to be over their country. Within weeks, Hamas eliminated any kind of political competitiveness in the country. We saw the same thing with Iran. We saw the same thing in Iraq with Saddam Hussein. This is the way these people operate. Again, this is not in a vacuum. These are not isolated incidents. This did not happen back in the 18s of somethings. This is happening right now today in the 21st century. Blasphemy laws have been used as tools of oppression to silence dissenters, minorities, and reformers. For black liberals, or you all who are out there yelling free Palestine, you're a black liberal, yeah, you, who stand firm on the First Amendment, it is a contradiction to support systems that punish people for asking hard questions or speaking out against injustice. Speech, especially uncomfortable speech, is a pillar of progressive activism. It's interesting to me that you take for granted the very action you're taking on the streets of New York and DC and Chicago and LA, Atlanta. But the people in Gaza, if they were to stand up against Hamas, we've seen it over and over again, outside of propaganda, because I don't believe some of these uprisings are real. Outside of propaganda, those who stand up against Hamas don't live to see another day, or they're imprisoned and segregated from their family for the rest of their lives. So you can't claim to be for speaking truth to power and then ignore when radical Islamic regimes jail or kill people for words. If you scream about free speech in America but shrug when a blogger in Pakistan gets murdered for questioning extremism, your moral compass is completely broken. Stop pretending Israel is the villain and start looking at the ones actually killing dissenters. Let's look at religious freedom in the Democratic Party in the United States versus religious freedom under Hamas, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, all these places you're talking about, let's free them. The Democratic Party has often been a haven for religious pluralism. Black liberals in particular embody a rich spiritual diversity from Christianity to traditional African religions, Islam, and like myself, Judaism. The ability to choose one's faith or reject religion altogether is deeply rooted in the American liberal values. Religious freedom is about respect, coexistence, and the refusal to impose one's belief system on another. In Sharia-based regimes, leaving Islam is a crime. I'll say that again. Leaving Islam is a crime. When is the last time someone went to jail in America for leaving their Baptist church, refusing to go to vacation Bible school, not wanting to eat kosher anymore? Tell me a time when you decided to wake up on Sunday, not go to church, and the next day you had your state police knocking on your door. Wait a minute, you can't, because it doesn't exist here. But it does exist in every single Muslim-ran country in the Middle East. This is what you want to free these people, quote unquote, back into. Again, you should be deeply ashamed of yourself. Anyway, I'll continue. Apostasy is considered a betrayal and is often met with harsh punishment, including imprisonment or executions. Converts to other religions, including Christianity and Judaism, face extreme dangers in countries like Iran, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. For black liberals, especially those from historical oppressed religious traditions, the idea that someone can be killed for their faith or lack thereof should raise an alarm. These values do not align and cannot be reconciled. If you cherish the right to worship freely in America, you must condemn any system that kills people for changing religions or even challenging religions. And stop acting like Israel is the problem when it's radical Islam that's imprisoning converts and slaughtering minorities. Consistency matters. If you're for religious freedom, be for it everywhere. Israel is the only place in the Middle East where you have a large number of people outside of the religion of that country. There are more Christians and people of Muslim faith in Israel than there are in any other country around Israel. Matter of fact, there's not a lot of Christians and Jews in the countries around. There's about 0 Jews in the countries surrounding Israel and very few Christians. Why? Because Christians at an alarming rate, whether it's East Africa, North Africa, West Africa, they are being mauled down by the hundreds of thousands by these Islamic jihadist regimes, just like Hamas. But yet we say from the river to the sea. Do you understand the chaos that you're advocating for? Maybe you do. I don't know. Let's move on to something that I think will hit more home. Maybe you're not so democratic. Maybe you're not so liberal. But what every Black American can come together on in this country of the United States is that slavery anywhere, in any form, is terrible. Why? Because the slavery that our ancestors had to go through. So we have an empathetic piece of our heart that is for anyone who's enslaved, whether that's chattel slavery, whether that's sharecropping, whether that's unfortunately human trafficking. We have a soft spot in our heart for anyone who is subjected to slavery, unless for some weird reason, it's the Arab nation doing it. Because you have such a, whether conscious or subconscious disdain for the state of Israel, you blindly side with Arabs who would choose to enslave you than Israelis who have a democratic system for you to live in. Let's look at the Arab-led Sub-Saharan slave trade. As we will see, this slave trade not only predates the transatlantic slave trade, but is still going on right now, today. Let's talk about it. So the Arab-led Sub-Saharan slave trade began centuries before the transatlantic slave trade and lasted well into the 20th century and even still exists today. Arab traders from the north raided East African villages, taking men, women, and children to serve as laborers, soldiers, eunuchs, and concubines in the Middle East and in North Africa. So you have to ask yourself, why in the heck are all these Middle Eastern, West Asian, North African countries Muslim? You want to talk about colonization? Let's talk about the Ottoman Empire. Let's talk about the sub-Saharan slave trade. Let's talk about what Muhammad did in the 5th and 6th, and the 500s and the 600s and the 700s. We always want to talk about the past and colonization. Let's talk about that. Because last I checked, there's only one country that speaks Hebrew. There's only one country that's national religion is Judaism. Only one Jewish country. But there are a bunch of Arab countries. I believe it's about 22 to 23 Arab countries, and even hundreds of countries that would say they are Christian, including the United States of America. Colonization doesn't look like one country. It looks like many. Just saying. Anyway, let's continue. Unlike the Atlantic slave trade, where descendants of slaves often became integrated into new nations, the Arab slave trade often involved castration of male slaves and the complete erasure of African lineage. They wasn't cool with the Africans. They wasn't trying to breed you so they can have more of you. And as sinister as that is, how wicked and demonic the transatlantic slave trade was, it doesn't even hold a shoe to what the sub-Saharan slave trade still is. This history, unfortunately, is rarely taught, which contributes to the dangerous lack of awareness within the Black community globally. The trauma of this forgotten chapter is no less severe than the horrors of slavery in the Americas. Why is this history not taught? Well, ladies and gentlemen, as history always goes, the victors write the history books. And if I'm the Ottoman Empire, if I'm Muhammad, I'm not putting my worst qualities forward. I'm putting my best foot forward. Why is the history of the slave trade in America taught? Well, because you have survivors of it who talked about it, who wrote about it, and who passed it on to their children, who talked about it and who wrote about it. And because this country is so great, you had founders who allowed for free speech to happen. So now even people who were quote unquote ex-slaves were able to write books and sell them and be New York bestsellers or whatever it was called back then. Frederick Douglass being one of them. One of my favorite books, Up from Slavery, Booker T. Washington was one of them. How many ex-trans-Saharan slaves have a book that you've read about? This may be your first time even hearing about the sub-Saharan slave trade. But that proves my point even more. For people who value truth, let me go back. The trauma of this forgotten chapter is no less severe than the horrors of slavery in America. For people who value truth-telling and historical reckoning, Black liberals must acknowledge and speak out against this legacy. It is an injustice to only confront European colonizers while remaining silent about Arab oppression. I will say it again. If you only acknowledge the European quote-unquote colonizers and you refuse to acknowledge the oppression of Arabs, your activism is fake, you're disingenuous, and your values, unfortunately, are connected to a skin color, which in turn will always do you harm and no good. We have to move away from looking at people and judging people based on their skin color. My people, we have to wake up. We have to get beyond skin color. We got to stop choosing our friends, our circles, all these things based on skin color. Well, Baruch, how do we choose? What should our circle look like? Your circle should look like your values. And that doesn't always mean that there's going to be Black folks all around you. You may be the only Black person in the room, but if the values match, nothing else should really matter. That's just my 2 cents. Take it or leave it. I'm sure a lot of y'all leave it, but it's okay. If you can name every European slave port, but can't name one Arab slave route, your history is incomplete, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're blaming Israel for African suffering while ignoring centuries of Arab exploitation and slavery, you're not about truth. You're about selective outrage. This one's interesting, and I'm sure most people have not heard about this, but the Zanj Rebellion and continued subjugation. So one of the most powerful movements in history was the Zanj Rebellion in 869 and 883 CE. It was in what is now what we call Iraq. Tens of thousands of East African slaves rose up against their Arab masters in a brutal revolt that lasted 14 years. This was not a minor uprising, but a massive and organized fight for freedom, largely erased from mainstream history. Even after the rebellion, African communities in Arab lands continued to face discrimination and systematic racism. Descendants of African slaves in places like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the UAE today still face social discrimination and limited rights. For Black liberals who view resistance as noble and who honor stories of rebellion and justice, the Zanj must be remembered. Their story mirrors our own fight for freedom. We celebrate Brother Nat Turner. I have a picture of him on my wall. But we forget the Zanj Rebellion. We chant never forget for one oppression while letting another one fade into silence. Stop letting radical Islamic violence off the hook just because it's politically inconvenient. Truth doesn't take sides. Now, I understand you want to be an activist, and I understand that you can't know or advocate for every single thing that's happening in every single country and every single city. I get it. But when the evidence is so clear against one nation opposed to another, you have to either, one, question where you're getting your information from, and then pivot to the truth and be completely silent about everything. Or two, admit you're wrong. And you don't have to advocate for Israel. That's not what I'm asking you to do. But just, if you admit you're wrong, just stay out of it. Don't be another voice leading people down the wrong path. That's all I ask. Let's look at the modern slave trade and the radical terror by Arab groups. All right. This will be my last segment, and then get on up out of here. All right. So, despite being outlawed in 1981, not 1865, not June 19th, 1865, 1981. And by the way, if you really think slaves were 100% free in the United States, June 19th, 1865, you also have incomplete history. There were the Native American tribes in Oklahoma. They're called the five civilized tribes. These are the tribes that were forced up out of Georgia and North South Carolina, Florida. We were called the Trail of Tears. It's these tribes. They legally owned slaves. Yes, Native Americans. A lot of them owned a lot of slaves until the fall of 1866. Just saying. Anyway, despite being outlawed in 1981 and criminalized in 2007, slavery continues in Mauritania, where lighter-skinned Arab Berber Moors enslaved darker-skinned Black Haitian people. Generational slavery persists, with families passing on ownership of other human beings, disgusting and demonic. In Libya, after the fall of Gaddafi, African migrants became easy targets for slave auctions, with document cases of men and women being sold for as little as $400. Now, if you remember the Libya uprising, that wasn't too long ago. There's still slaves over there, humans being sold like cattle. These are not rumors or conspiracy theories. Human rights groups, journalists, and UN investigators have confirmed these atrocities. For Blacks who support modern anti-racism movements and refugee rights, there is a moral obligation to condemn these Arab-led violations of human dignity. Silence on this issue makes us complicit. You can't say in one breath, Black Lives Matter, and be silent while Black bodies are literally being sold in slave markets right now today by your Arab friends, their relatives that you're marching next to talking about free Palestine. Their relatives are owning slaves. And if you're spending all your outrage on Israel while ignoring this, you've got it backwards, my friends. In Sudan, this is probably the saddest one because here in our city, Memphis, we have a lot of Sudanese refugees, who are here because of this very thing right here. So in Sudan, the Darfur genocide saw Arab militants slaughter Black Africans by the hundreds of thousands. In Algeria, Tanzania, Egypt, Sub-Saharan Africa, Sub-Saharan Africans face rampant xenophobia and abuse. In Somalia, the Bantu minority is still treated as second-class citizens and historically enslaved, still to this day. In many Arab countries, the term abid slave is still used as a racial slur for black people. Black liberals, who rightly call out white supremacy and demand equality in America, cannot ignore Arab supremacy abroad. Justice must be consistent. We must have the courage to confront racism wherever it exists, even when it complicates geopolitical alliances or interfaith relationships. There's no room for selective outrage. If you can see racism in the West, but are blind to it in the Arab nations, that's not activism. That's hypocrisy. Israel is not the one calling black people slaves as a casual insult. Radical Islam's racism is real. And if you care about justice, you'll name it. Listen, ladies and gentlemen. I know this is a hard episode. A lot of hard things to hear. Feel free to fact check me on whatever you want to fact check me on. I'm cool with that. Here's one thing that we must do, right? We must be honest about what we believe, what we're backing, and all these different things, okay? It's time to stop romanticizing alliances that ignore history. For black people, whether liberal, conservative, religious, or secular, the truth is this: Arab supremacy and Sharia law have historically oppressed black bodies and spirits. If you're going to, quote unquote, stay woke, we must wake up to all injustices, not just the ones trending on Twitter. That's all I have for today. So as always, light up the darkness, change the world. Peace.